Okay, so this video is designed to show you what those parentheses were at the end of our functions, function names. And, oh, what are we looking at pseudocode again? I thought we got past that. You never get past pseudocode. You always want to fall back on pseudocode. No more lectures. Just show us what arguments and to modules means. All right. So here's our pseudocode, and we talked about, we have our main module, and then I have this module that I'm calling called show sum. And here's those parentheses, but this time in these parentheses, I have some variables. And this is pseudocode, so we're going to do a little bit different in Python, obviously, but this demonstrates what we're going to be doing. So the idea here is that we want to send our module some data that it can use in its code. In other words, display the sum of 12 and 45 is, and we need to obviously do that calculation, which is the point of this module. And so we're going to call show sum, and then we're going to send show sum, this function, 2 bits of data. In this case, they are 2 integers. We're going to send it a 12 and a 45. And so when we send data, we call the name of the function that we want to run, and then in the parentheses, we put in the list of the data that we want to send it. So we call these pieces of data the argument. We're going to send the arguments. The function that's receiving those arguments in its parentheses has to have some variables that can receive that data. So in this case, num1 is receiving the value 12, and num2 is receiving the value of 45. We call these parameters. So we send arguments and we receive parameters. So the idea here is that show sum, then when it runs the line of code that's particular to this function, because we've sent data to these variables now have numbers in them, just like if we had said num1 equals 12 and num2 equals 45. So that when we get to our calculation, we have num1 contains 12 from here, num2 contains 45 from here. So the two are added together, the value is put into result, and in this case, the result is displayed. The module ends, and the program returns back to the place that it was called from, and in this case, the end module is executed. So let's look and see how we can do this in Python. Okay, so I have set up a skeleton for our Python code. The purpose is using arguments and parameters, which is a way for us to send data to a function. So let's get started. Let's recall how we create functions in the first place. I'm going to create a function like we did the last time that says that was a greeting. So we do define the name of our function. I'm going to call this one greeting. And then we're going to put the parentheses for the moment just to remember what we did last time. And we would print hello. And then just do that for the moment. And then remember that we created a main method. We agreed that we are always going to have a main. And then main is going to call greeting. Greeting. Okay. And let's just make sure it runs. Remember, I have to call main in order to make that work. So hopefully this looks familiar from the last video. And then we're going to run it, and it says hello. So nothing different than we've done before, but just a little refresher. So now let's figure out how this is supposed to work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, let's see, demonstrate the parameter and argument. So I want to send, let's do this. Let's get the name of our user from our user. So username is equal to input. What is, let's spell what? What is your name? Okay. And that value is going to go into username. So once they put in their username, I would like for this to print out hello and their name. So well, you're going to say, well, unfortunately, let me just demonstrate this, and we'll talk about this in another video. Why can't I just print user name here? Isn't it available because we set it here? Well, strangely enough, oh, miss parentheses. I always miss parentheses around. That is my Achilles heel. All right, so run, and we're going to get this error, I'm guessing, that says username is not defined. And what we have to kind of start to get a hold of is just because, let's just say, this username, this variable, is only available to the statements in this function. So username is not anywhere in this function, and so Python said, hey, I don't know what a username is. Well, that was kind of the idea, is we wanted it to know username. And so what we can do then is we're going to send the value of this variable. In other words, we're going to send username. Remember in the PowerPoint I showed you that this is the parameter. So whatever got put into this variable is going to be sent along with the call to this function. And so we have to receive the data. So I'm going to give this a parameter. And it doesn't have to be the same name. Just recognize that. It can be something different, and I'm going to purposely give it something different to demonstrate a point. This variable now is available to every line of code in this function. Username is not available. The name itself is not available, but the data that was in username is now in NME for the purpose of this function. So username still won't work. Let's just check it. So username won't work yet. I'm still going to get the error because this function doesn't know what username is, but it does know what name is because this variable is available to all the lines of code in this function. So we sent name from this variable into this variable, and then we'll print it out here. So let's see if that works. Run. Let's do a different name. I'm tired of that name. Let's do JD because it's quicker to type. That's the name of my black lab in case you're curious. Anyway, so now you can see that NME, the value, is being printed because it got sent from this variable into this variable, and then this variable printed. So we have to start being aware of how long is our variables going to contain the data, or how long can we get at that data. So let's take this another step further. So let's just go back to the fact that we're sending data from a parameter into an argument, and this particular function then can run it. All right, what if I have two pieces of data? In other words, maybe I'm going to do user age equals int input. What is your age? Okay, there we go. And so now we want to send, maybe we're going to send to greeting, let's see, we're going to send it, it's also going to receive the age. I'm giving it different names on purpose just to kind of show you that there's a difference. So now greeting is receiving two pieces of data. It's receiving the name, and it's receiving an integer of age. And just for, let's just print it out. Nothing really pretty there, but that's okay. Now we're going to get an error. Let me just demonstrate the error, because what is your age? Well, of course I'm 21, and I got this nasty error. How come? Let's see, type error. Greeting is missing one required positional argument. In other words, greeting is missing a piece of data. Greeting is expecting to receive two pieces of data, but it in fact was only sent one piece of data. So we got an error. So not only can we send data back and forth, back to from one call to the function, we have to make sure that whatever this function expects to receive, that it is given in the same amount of variables. In other words, now if I put in user age, Remember that I'm getting user age from here. So I'm sending name and user age, 2 pieces of data, into 2 parameters. So this greeting is expecting 2 pieces of data, and then it did receive 2 pieces of data, and now it should be able to print that out. What is your name? JD. What is your age? 21. And sure enough, that seems to work just fine. So let me just reiterate the point that user age, which is a variable that's available to this function, is not available in this function. And I'll go ahead and run that just to prove that point again. And what is my age? 21. And sure enough, I got the error. User age is not defined here because it's not. It's defined in this function and not in this function. So we're going to put in the age here. Okay, so now we have decided that we can send over more than 1 piece of data, and I could send more if I wanted to. It doesn't have to be contained to 1 or 2, or we also saw that at sometimes we might receive nothing, right? And if I receive nothing, then I would also need to send nothing. So both of those would have to go away, and those are the opening and closing parentheses that were empty that we saw in the last video. Okay, so the other thing that we want to make sure of when we're sending data back and forth is that we also send over the same type of data. In other words, we agree that we can send in the same number of parameters and arguments. We also have to make sure that we send them, we have to send them in the same order. For example, let's say we know that M's name is coming here. What happens if I switch these 2 around? What if I did it this way? What's going to happen? Well, let's see. If I mix them up, what is my name? JD. What is my age? 21. See how it transposed it? So these go in the same order in which they're in the same order. So user age is going to match the first argument or parameter here in greeting. This one's going to go to the second one. So the order matters here. So number matters, order matters, and so does the type of data. So you have to make sure that you're sending over the appropriate type. In other words, let's say, we kind of knew that we're expecting, let's do this. So instead of, I'm going to go back to print name, and let's do something like this. Let's say that if the age, so if the value that got sent over here is greater than 50, then print remember the good old days. Okay, else if the age is 50 or less, print hello young one. Okay, so if we are not careful to pay attention to the data types, in other words, obviously this has to be an integer in order for this condition to be rendered correctly. So if we didn't send this as an integer, in other words, let's say I didn't send this over as an integer. Let's say we send it over as a string instead. So I didn't make this conversion. And now when I run it, this is being sent over as what? As a string. So the age is receiving a string, and this shouldn't work because we can't really do a comparison. Well, not the type of comparison we're expecting. That's going to be an ASCII character. Let's see if we even get an error on this. Let's see what happens. What is my age? 21. And we got a big nasty error because it says you got a string and an int problem. I don't understand. I can't play that game. And I also can't remember how to spell apparently. So the point there was make sure that not only are we sending the same amount of parameters, we're sending them in the same order, but we also have to pay attention to the data type to make sure that we're sending the same data types to our function. And so to correct that then, let's put the int back. Int back. There we go. And so now that should run accordingly. And what is your name? JD. And maybe he's 94 now. And remember the good old days. So that is actually working the way we expected to. So that's the idea. So this video then introduced you to the concept of arguments and parameters. We saw how we can send data to our functions. We also saw why we have to send data to our functions, and that is because these variables that are defined within a function are available only to that function. So in order for another function to have access to that data, we have to create a new variable and put it into these parentheses so that way we can receive that variable from whoever called us. And now we have access to what we call a local variable, or variables that are available only to this function now. So that is Introduction to Arguments and Parameters.